Hi everybody, and welcome to the Tundra Connections webcast, Polar Bear Spies. We are coming live near Churchill, Manitoba on the shores of Hudson Bay from Buggy 1, and we are surrounded by polar bears. We have had an incredible morning watching polar bears roll around the tundra, and we are so excited today to talk to you about how cool these animals are and how we learn all about them when they're out on the sea ice. So today we have a few special guests who I'll introduce in just a moment. We will be talking for about 30 to 40 minutes, and we do want to answer your questions. So please do send us in any questions you have, and you have a couple options. There is a chat window below where you are seeing this webcast, so feel free to pop questions in there, or you can email our team at questions@pbears.org. So questions@pbears.org. We would love to hear from you. So very briefly, I want to introduce our panel that's going to speak to you today so you know who you can ask questions to. And then we're going to start talking about cool polar bear technology. So I'm Elisa, and to my left is Jeff.
Hi, my name is Jeff York. I'm the Senior Director of Conservation for Polar Bears International. And I've been working on polar bears for 20 years as of this year.
Thank you. Amy?
Hi, my name is Amy. I'm a university student and I am studying polar bears.
Thank you. Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg Tiemann. I'm a professor of environmental studies at York University, and I've been working on polar bears for almost 18 years, especially interested in what polar bears eat.
Fantastic. Thanks, you guys. We're really excited to talk to you today. But before we really kick off into technology, we better let you know a couple basic things about polar bears. First of all, where do polar bears live? Amy, could you tell our viewers?
Polar bears live in the Arctic. They definitely prefer to be in cold places, and if they can, they try to stay away from people.
Fantastic. And Jeff, when are they in the Arctic all year round? What are they doing?
Polar bears are in the Arctic all year round. They are not present in Antarctica at all. They would like that. The penguins, not so much.
Yeah.
And up here, they prefer to be out on the ice. Historically, most polar bears spend most of the time out on the ice year-round. So it's only places like Hudson Bay where the sea ice melts completely in the summertime that we see bears ashore, or they can easily be viewed by us like the ones you've been seeing outside the window.
Thanks, Jeff. And why are they in the Arctic and on the sea ice? Greg?
Well, the Arctic Ocean is a pretty special place, and that's where polar bears are. They're on the frozen surface of the Arctic Ocean, but what the Arctic Ocean does is produce a lot of biological productivity, much more than you would get, say, on land in the Arctic. So that's why there's polar bears, and there's seals, and there's fish, and there's all kinds of diverse marine life in the Arctic Ocean, and polar bears use the sea ice to get at that productivity, especially the seals that haul out on the ice.
Thank you. So I think that builds a pretty good picture of where polar bears live. We are in one particular area of the polar bears world called Western Hudson Bay. But lots of what we're talking about today can be used all over the place. But the polar bear you are looking at right now, that is from a camera mounted on Buggy 1, where we're talking to you today. And so we have 5 polar bear cams all throughout the tundra near Churchill. We work with a group called explore.org, and this is one way we can spy on polar bears. Well, we can actually see this polar bear right now with our own 2 eyes, but the camera can be watching the polar bears even in the middle of the night. So last night when we were all asleep, a mom and cub walked by outside, and we just saw the footage this morning on the camera, which was pretty cool. I didn't even know that was happening. So technology can tell us a lot about what polar bears are doing when we're not actually able to see them with our own 2 eyes. And it's really important to know more about polar bears because they're going through a lot of change right now. And the more we know about polar bears or any animal, the more that we can help that animal. Jeff, could you speak really briefly about why we're concerned about polar bears right now?
Sure. So I think most of you know a little bit, or at least have heard about climate change. Our planet's getting warmer. Well, that warmth is happening over 2 times as much or 2 times as quickly in the Arctic. So it's much warmer up here and it's happening much faster. And that is melting polar bears' sea ice habitat, that sea ice they need to survive and thrive.
Thanks so much. So there are a lot of different ways that we can learn about polar bears. which is pretty cool. I see BJ is showing a really neat graphic there about the loss of sea ice. So it just shows you how much of the polar bear's habitat has been lost. And there's a lot of great research programs going on right now to help us know what's going on with polar bears. And one of those projects that Polar Bears International has looks at moms and cubs. So Jeff, could you also tell the viewers a little bit about the maternal den study?
Sure. So working with our partners at USGS and Brigham Young University, PBI has been trying to figure out what polar bear moms do at their dens. When do they come out of their dens in the spring? How long do they stay there? And then what are they doing while they're there? So starting in Alaska, we've deployed sort of the latest available technologies, what we've come to call the den cam or the cooler cam, and we can remotely watch polar bear den sites in places way out on the tundra and without any kind of human interference. There, you can see on the screen there a picture of one of the cooler cams that we can deploy. These can run for like 80 days without anybody going out there to change batteries or things like that. They have solar power, they're super cool, and they provide us some really good information on denning and den disturbance.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Jeff. And I don't know if we have any more footage of the maternal den cams or if we've showed it. I think BJ is going to show us something. Pulling it up. So we also have BJ Kirchhoffer here in the background who you can't see, and he's our producer using technology to bring us to you, which is pretty fantastic.
So here what you're seeing, this is some den cam work from Svalbard, Norway, and you're seeing the very first emergence of a female coming out of her den location up on the mountainside in Norway.
That's pretty special footage. Thank you so much. So we're going to take a question right now, and then we're going to talk about our next cool research project. Greg, I'm going to throw this one to you. Do polar bears lose their teeth?
You know what? Polar bears do lose their teeth. That's a great question. They lose their teeth as very young cubs, just like if you have a puppy during their first year of life. Those first teeth, what we sometimes call milk teeth, will fall out as the bear gets older. His or her skull gets to be close to adult size, and those deciduous teeth fall out and are replaced by adult ones.
Cool. There's probably no polar bear tooth fairy, though, I assume.
You never know.
Yeah, you never know. Thank you so much. Cool. We're going to talk about our next really neat research project that's actually happening right here just outside our window on these polar bears. And it's a project that Amy is working on. So Amy, could you tell us a little bit about the radar project we have going on right now?
Definitely. So this new project that we have is really neat, and it uses radars, which are about the size of an iPad, if you know what those look like. And what they do is they send out a signal, and then if it bounces off something and comes back to them, it starts recording it. It's kind of like, I'm sure some of you have heard of bats before, how they use echolocation with sound. It's kind of like that. So that's how the radar sees. And once it catches something, it connects to a video, so we can actually see exactly what the radars are seeing. This is a really cool project that lets us see polar bears at any time of day, in any weather. As you can imagine, we can't always find them with our eyes, but the radars let us find them whenever we'd like. So it's a really neat way to watch them when we're not able to.
Cool. And what's a way that we could expand this technology? If it works here, then what could we do with the tool?
So this is really interesting because you don't need to be there to have it working. So we could take it really far up north where there's a lot of polar bears and very few people, and we could use it to make sure that they aren't coming into contact with one another. Because as cool as polar bears are, you probably don't want to meet one in person on the ground. So these radars could actually work to say, hey, stop, there's a polar bear there, don't go there. Or they could say, you're all good, go explore. So we're hoping to be able to do that to keep both the polar bears and the people safe.
That is so neat. So radar can pick up a polar bear moving even when it's dark outside?
Sure
You
can.
see them? That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
There's another tool that can pick up polar bears even when it's dark outside. And it's one that we tried out a couple years ago from Buggy One, and we have some cool footage of it. And I will ask Jeff to explain FLIR to you. What is FLIR? How does that work?
Sure. So FLIR is forward-looking infrared radar.
Okay.
And it basically measures heat differences, and it can measure up to like 1/10 of a degree centigrade difference, which is quite fine. And so you often see sometimes when you're reading about polar bears that they're invisible to infrared. Well, the video you're watching now shows that's hardly the case. They're quite visible in the infrared spectrum. We can use this to see bears at night for things like conflict avoidance, but we can also use this to find maternal dens under the snow. And a lot of polar bears range, polar bears den in snow caves. And once a storm comes through and it drifts over that entrance hole, you'd have no idea there's a polar bear in a snowbank. But with FLIR, under the right conditions, we can tell if somebody's home.
That is pretty cool technology. And make sure that you are sending in your questions. We are going to move on to some other ways to spy on polar bears, and we're going to talk about more work that happens right here with the polar bears that you can see on the explore.org polar bear cams, which is pretty exciting. So one way to track polar bears, we're not necessarily seeing them, but we can still figure out where they are by using GPS. And that's maybe something that you've seen in your parents' vehicle. Some people would have it on their phone if you're maybe a teenager or an adult watching. So we can use GPS technology to find out what the polar bears are doing on the sea ice when they're very, very far away from people, and it's dark and it's cold and it's dangerous for humans to get out there. So how on earth do we know what's going on? Well, we have a couple different ways. One is to collar polar bears. So here's an example of a polar bear collar. You can see it on your screen there. So we can collar female polar bears. Males' necks are too big compared to their skulls, so males can actually slip this off their neck if they want to. But female polar bears, who are adults, can carry this collar for about a year. And when they walk out onto the sea ice, their collar talks to a satellite, and we, the researchers, can sit at our desk, and from an email, we can find out where the polar bears are moving. And if you guys are interested in watching polar bears move, check out the Polar Bears International Bear Tracker online. We post updated locations of bears all winter long, so you can see where real polar bears are, and you can spy on them through a satellite, which is pretty neat. So we'll make sure that we post links to the Bear Tracker in the comment box, and it's on our website. Now, Jeff, one question we did have in, how do we make the satellites tell us where the polar bear is?
Sure. So we have two different methods we've used with polar bears. One, which is an older technology we call Argos, and it's a combination of satellites and ground stations. So you have big satellite dishes talking up to space and so forth and getting the information back to scientists. It's not as accurate as modern GPS. A newer system uses the same satellites we use for satellite telephones. So sort of like a satellite-based cell phone there, and it's very accurate and works in different areas a little bit better than others. Mm-hmm. So it hasn't always been as good in the Arctic, but it's been improving every year.
Very, very important to keep improving things. And it's really important that we have all sorts of different kind of folks studying polar bears. We need people that are really good at biology, people that are really good at technology, good at writing and communicating, and that helps us learn better about the polar bear and learn more things about polar bears. Now, I did mention that we only collar female polar bears, so how are we going to learn about the male polar bears? Because they're important too. And if we only know what's going on with some of the polar bears, then we can't get a really good picture about how to help all of them. So as technology is improving, it's able to get smaller, and we have more options with what we can do to spy on polar bears. So one really cool thing that we have helped fund in some research and that people are developing is a GPS ear tag. Pretty cool. So look how small this is compared to this. So this collar does last longer, but this ear tag still lasts up to about 6 months, and we can put it in the ears of males and also the subadult, kind of like the teenager bears, the younger bears. It's really important to know what they're doing out on the sea ice too. So just by giving a polar bear this earring, we can track it when it comes off the sea ice or goes on the sea ice. So these go out about twice a year in the Western Hudson Bay on, up to 10 or 20 polar bears, and we are getting really cool information. Now, this is an earring, like I said, it goes through the ear, but we are potentially interested in trying to find even other ways to track polar bears. Jeff, maybe you could talk about something that we're trying to develop?
Sure. So just this year, we're launching a pilot program with 3M. So
cool.
3M is the company that brings us Post-it notes. They also work on adhesives, and they also do things like Velcro, a physical attachment. So our question to the engineers at 3M is, can you take this and help us adhere it to a polar bear so it's temporary? So you don't have to poke any holes in the bear. You just pop it on, and either with sort of non-toxic adhesives and or a physical grabber, like little hooks in the fur, we could stick this on a polar bear like that, and it would just stay on until the polar bear molts in the summertime.
Very cool. So here's an example of some polar bear fur, and it would basically just kind of tuck right in there.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure.
So we had another great question come in about how long the collar lasts on the bear, and that's a really great question. So these collars actually have something that's programmed into them where they attach, and it falls off on its own after a year. So we can tell the collar when we want it to fall off, and it will just drop off the bear when it's ready to. So that's pretty neat that we have that technology that can do that. We have another type of collar that's been used in just a couple areas of the world, but gives us really neat information about what it's like to be in the day of a polar bear. What are polar bears doing, like moment to moment? Because this sort of technology can give us a big picture view. We can see where the bear is moving, when, for how long, and we can match that up to sea ice, but we can't actually see what the bear is seeing. And to get information like that would be really cool. And so maybe Amy, you could speak just really briefly about the collar cameras, which is pretty cool. And BJ has some footage that he can bring up to show folks what we're talking about. What kind of stuff could we learn from an actual collar camera on a polar bear?
So these are really interesting because you can actually see what the polar bear is doing and what it's seeing. So if it starts to eat some berries, you know that it's eating some berries, or if it's going for a walk or a jog. It's a neat little way to see exactly what they're seeing rather than just where they are.
Thank you so much. Great. Well, we're just still getting questions in, so please remember to email us questions@pbears.org or stick your questions in the chat window. Now, as we learn more about polar bears, we can help them a little bit better, but it's really important that we all work together to help polar bears. Even if you're not using this sort of technology, there are things we can all do. Jeff mentioned earlier in the broadcast that part of the reason we're concerned about polar bears is because it's warming and we're losing their habitat. So we'll ask BJ to pull up the heat trapping blanket video, and we'll explain a little bit better about what is actually going on up in the Arctic and why we're concerned about polar bears and want to learn more about them.
Sea ice in the Arctic is disappearing. Why is this happening? When we burn fossil fuels for energy, we add more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Regular carbon dioxide is used and created by normal life processes, like photosynthesis and breathing. But rampant carbon dioxide comes from burning fossil fuels for energy. The excess carbon dioxide builds up like a thick blanket that traps the Earth's heat and disrupts the climate. Too much heat messes with the Earth's climate. A warmer world has lots of consequences. One consequence is a warmer Arctic with less and less sea ice.
So polar bears are losing areas of their home in some parts of the world, but there absolutely are things that we can all do to make sure that polar bears stay in the Arctic always. By protecting their sea ice habitat, we're also helping protect ourselves. Sea ice is a really important ecosystem for the entire planet, not just for polar bears. It helps support all the animals in the Arctic. Sea ice is kind of like the soil is to a forest. So little algae, the plants, grow actually in and under the sea ice and form the base of the food chain. They feed the little creatures that feed the fish, that feed the seals. It's like an underwater garden. It is such an important part of the entire ecosystem, and polar bears are at the top of it. You can see in this food chain animation that there's all sorts of things relying on the sea ice. But sea ice also acts like Earth's air conditioner. Because it is so bright and reflective, it reflects sunlight away from the Earth. And so it helps cool us all down. No matter where you live, the Earth is helped to be cooler because of having sea ice. So it's really important that we all work together in our communities to protect the earth for all of us. And there's lots of ways we can do that. So BJ can pull up some various, we've got all sorts of great photos from people all around the world giving great examples of what's going on. So it's important that we protect polar bears from being harmed by climate change, and this means safeguarding the sea ice they depend on. Now the key is moving toward energy sources like solar that don't add to the heat trapping blanket effect. It's important to look for ways we can make a difference in our communities. So ask your school officials to set the thermostat up or down, depending on the season, by at least 2 degrees. You can compete with other schools nearby to see who could reduce energy consumption the most. You can talk to your parents and your friends' parents about getting designated bike lanes on more roads, and you could even organize a bike bus to get kids safely to school and to camp without relying on cars. Many people around the world are joining together in communities to do things that use much less of the types of energy that burn fossil fuels. Even in Churchill, we run a couple of our polar bear cams using solar and wind power. It's pretty cool. So all these steps are steps towards safeguarding the sea ice that polar bears depend on. And it's the right thing to do for them, for our planet, and for ourselves. So if you guys are doing anything for polar bears, we would love to hear about it. And we have a couple more questions coming in that are really great. And I've got a perfect one for Greg. Greg, is it true that polar bears can stay hydrated from just eating fat and not drinking water?
That is true, and it's one of the ways that we think polar bears do really well in this very dry environment. For much of the year, when the sea ice melts in parts of polar bear range, the bears will be forced to come on shore, and they won't have very much to eat, and they'll be relying on their stored fat for energy. And metabolizing that fat, breaking down that fat for energy, actually creates H2O molecules, water molecules, chemically inside the bear. So it reduces the amount of water they have to drink. Obviously, a source of water around polar bears is often snow, but that's also expensive to consume snow and melt it for water. So this is a really energy efficient way for polar bears to stay hydrated.
Very cool. You guys can't do that. You should drink water to stay hydrated, but polar bears have a different system. That's pretty neat. We've got another very cool question. Maybe, Jeff, I'll ask you this one. It's kind of a tough one. Not really. Do polar bears have different personalities? Are they all kind of different?
They do. From what we see here, observing bears in Churchill, from what I've seen out on the sea ice as well, polar bears are individuals. They react to different stimulus a lot, different from one another. A great example of that, specific to Alaska, is in the middle of the state, in the Arctic, we have a big active oil and gas industry. And most bears probably want nothing to do with that much human kind of busyness. Mm-hmm. But every now and then we get a female who will kind of roll right in and put a den in right next to a large building, filled with us, making all kinds of racket. So some bears have greater tolerance to things like that than others.
Pretty neat. So we're all a little bit different. So these bears that you're seeing on the camera right now, maybe are they just extra sleepy bears, or is this pretty normal to see right now?
So the two bears you're looking at now have been going at it all morning. They've been doing what we call sparring, so play fighting. And actually the last couple of days, we're pretty sure it's the same two males here, have been very active, playing with each other, play fighting and wrestling, and quite vigorously. So they're just taking a break.
Well-deserved break, it seems like. We've got another great question. So today on the Tundra, it is Halloween. So this is October 31st, 2018. And Halloween is a pretty special time of year for any kid. It means trick-or-treating, candy, chocolate, costumes, lots of fun. But in Churchill and in other northern communities, it can be a little bit different because have you ever had to worry about trick-or-treating with polar bears outside? Probably not. But the kids in Churchill do have to think about that. But the adults in town help keep them safe. And Jeff, could you just tell us a couple things about how kids are able to safely trick-or-treat in Churchill?
Sure. Churchill is really lucky in that the province of Manitoba has what they call the Polar Bear Alert Program. So they have professional conservation officers and seasonal employees that work throughout polar bear season to keep bears and people separate from each other. On Halloween, they go even further, and a whole bunch of volunteer parents join the conservation officers. They spread out around town, and they do everything they can to make sure no bears are sneaking in when the kids are out on the street. So that's pretty cool here. And some other northern communities further north, they just move trick-or-treating inside. So they'll bring trick-or-treating to a school gym or something like that, but one place where kids can come, have fun, get some candy, and be, away from wandering polar bears.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'm glad they have that option so they can still get out there and have some fun. Okay, we're going to take a couple more questions before we wrap up, so please do get your questions in. And we're going to continue watching these very neat polar bears just outside our window here. They're all around us, actually, which is pretty cool. Okay, next question. Greg, I'm going to shoot this one to you. When polar bear cubs attack each other, or maybe play fight, are they playing or are they really fighting? Like, what are these sorts of interactions we're seeing with younger bears, maybe?
Well, they're definitely playing, and we see cubs of different ages interact with each other. Polar bear moms will often give birth to 2 or sometimes even 3 cubs, and those cubs grow up together. They're brothers or sisters, and they wrestle, they play, they fool around with each other and with their mom, and that's an important part of learning how to be a polar bear. After they leave their mom's care and they're living on their own, at this time of year, when the bears are on shore and there's not much to eat, there's not much to do, they engage in adult play. They're just fooling around with each other, and nobody's getting hurt, everybody's having fun, but they're likely also learning there too. They're learning about their neighbors, they're learning about other, often these are young adult males that are interacting in this way. And so they might be trying out new moves, they might be kind of scoping out their opponent, because when they get back onto the sea ice, these same males may actually end up fighting for real over access to mates. So this is play, but it's also an important learning experience.
Yeah, well, we're sure lucky to be able to watch it, and check out our website and our YouTube channel and our Facebook and anywhere you find Polar Bears International for cool clips that we'll post online of what we're seeing around here. So one question I'm going to throw over to Amy, and then we'll just have a couple more and we'll wrap up. Amy, how did you get into polar bear research?
So I got very lucky. I kind of have a little bit of a different background. I looked at more social things when I went to university, and then I decided that I thought wildlife was really cool. So I went back to school, got some more science credits and math credits, and then I met Greg, who is my supervisor, and I was studying with him for a while. I actually studied elephants for 2 years, and then one day Greg sent me an email and said, I've got a cool project for you. And I jumped on it, said, of course I'm going to do that. Couldn't turn down a chance to come up here and see these amazing animals. So kind of got a little lucky, but also going back and doing your sciences is very important.
Great. Well, we're happy to have you here and joining us for this week. Okay, last question. I'm going to throw this one to Jeff, or maybe Greg, or whoever wants to answer it. How far can polar bears walk? Which we probably know due to this GPS technology. Pretty far.
Pretty far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll jump in and relate it back to the earlier question of, do polar bears have personalities? And one of the ways that we know that they definitely do have personalities is that they walk different distances. And we know that some adult females that are wearing collars, they'll just go like only a few hundred kilometers and stay in one little bay, and they're catching seals and they're doing very well for themselves over the course of a year, not having to really travel very far at all. Whereas we have data from other bears that we collared in the Beaufort Sea near Alaska, and some of those bears traveled more than 6,000 kilometers in a year, which is about the distance, if you flew in an airplane from New York City to London, England, that's about the same distance. So that's a long way to walk in a year.
And we know from the satellite collars they can cover that, 20 to 30 miles in a go.
Wow.
So in one day, that's how far they can push on.
pretty great.
Yeah.
And again, these are things we know from technology that helps us learn about the secret lives of polar bears. So with that, we have to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we talked about maternal den cameras, our polar bear cams here near Churchill, GPS collars, ear tag radio GPS things. We talked about so much cool stuff, and all of this information is available in places on our website. So please do check that out. And it's important to remember that time remains to protect polar bears, so we can all work together to reduce carbon and to use the types of energy that are better for the planet. So whether you are a student, a teacher, an adult, anyone can check out the Get Involved section of our website, where you can find all sorts of different ways that you can help bring about change in your community. If you are a teacher or anyone watching, we would love it if you could fill out our feedback survey as well at the bottom of your screen if you're watching live. Getting feedback helps us make our program better, and you will be entered to win one of 3 polar bear cub adoptions for your class, and you'll get a link to special polar bear resources online, which is pretty great. So thank you so much. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to Frontiers North Adventures, who give us Buggy One all fall so we can do this program and find polar bears for you. Thank you to Explore.org, who helps also bring polar bears to you wherever you are in the world. They want everyone to be able to see polar bears and learn about them. And also thanks to Canada Goose, one of our main sponsors, keeps us warm and does so much for us and for polar bears. And thanks to our viewers, most of all. Thanks to all the students. Thanks for everyone who's getting involved in your communities to help. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to talking to you again soon from the tundra. Bye.
People need to know about a species in order to act on behalf of that species and protect their habitat. Polar Bears International is uniquely poised to connect people to polar bears in the Arctic. The Tundra Connections program allows us to connect scientists with viewers around the globe. And the goal of outreach like this is to instill hope and inspire action in our viewers.
We have a mobile broadcast studio, and we reach out to classrooms all over the world to talk about polar bears in the western Hudson Bay. We have a couple different kinds of connections that we do out here. Sometimes it's live back and forth, and other times the live connection goes out and questions are chatted back for us to answer.
Will polar bears go extinct?
What can my class do to help protect sea ice?
Just the other day, we had a Skype chat with an entire school in Kiev, and we got to show them their very first polar bear, and when that comes up on the screen, it's really cool.
It's neat to maybe inspire the next generation of scientists. Seeing their faces light up when we show them videos and photos and talk about our research gives us motivation to keep going and keep doing what we're doing.
Join us as we stream live. You can view the broadcast on our website or watch live chats on social media. Tune in, ask questions, join our efforts to protect polar bears and the sea ice they depend on.